Keeping in line with my recent string of videos analyzing characters and such, I'm going to be delving into one of the more recent seasonals that happens to have just ended this week, because one person in particular caught my attention, and has since started the thought mill on this show and how to interpret its characters, and what I've found is that a lot of them are deceptively intricate. Now, a lot of things really caught people's attention this summer, and I will spare the list because there were a lot of things that happened. One of the biggest ones, though, was Alya-san Sometimes Hides Her Feelings in Russian, a cute little rom-com anime about a half-Russian girl who flirts with a guy she doesn't think can understand her, completely unaware of the fact that he knows everything she's saying. And I stumbled upon this way back when and read about one volume and thought, not really for me, but the anime has me way more interested. Barring my initial complaint that Alya herself was one of the weakest links in the show, and the whole thing suffered for it, I've been really enjoying it. It's one of my favorites this season, as I've enjoyed the characters, the humor, and the story thus far. All in all, I'm happy with it. Though, it's currently no masterpiece like some other rom-coms I've talked about around here are. As for why this anime blew up so big, well, the first episode was for the feet bros, and that certainly helps. But aside from that initial viral moment of Kuze putting Alya's socks on, there's been one other thing that people have been going on about.
Good morning, my brother. たった今、お前のせいでグッドじゃなくなったわ。おいおい、可愛い妹による寝起きボディプレスじゃねえか。喜べよ。寝起きドッキリみたいに言うんじゃねえ。
Incest is wincest, I guess. Yuki Suo jumped into the spotlight with her incestuous antics and overly flamboyant personality the moment she showed up. For a while now, she's effectively been the star of the show, eclipsing the actual main characters, Alya and Masachika, with her own gremlin-like behavior, which I honestly feel is a shame because there are a lot of subtle things about the two that I think make them worth attention in their own right. But my complaints about how people view this series aside, it's been a thing. However, I can't be the only one who believes that this incest is wincest attitude she takes on in the early series is a ruse, right? I can't possibly be the only one who's convinced she doesn't actually want to fuck her brother, right? And this is where I'm going to take a bit of a step out onto a limb and risk my reputation as this deep thinker and intelligent anime analyst. You're asking who says that? Nobody, but I made it all up, okay? Nobody thinks I'm that smart, obviously. It's not like I'm famous by any means, so there's hardly a reputation. That's not the point. I wanted to start sharing some thoughts on the seasonals now that the summer season is coming to an end, and Yuki Suo was the one who was most prevalent in my mind. Now, I want to talk about the real person, not the masks that get put on throughout the series. The issue is, I'm armed with only a season of the anime and one light novel's worth of context, so if any of you light novel readers out there are listening to this, I would highly appreciate the corrections if I happen to be wrong. So let's begin with the dissection. The first thing I want to mention is that there's a very clear theme in this series about how who people appear to be is not actually who they are. It's almost a deconstruction of the idea of best foot forward, showing how people present themselves and comparing it to how they actually are. As Alya herself puts it, it's only natural that people would behave differently in different circumstances. It's a very clear core concept of the series, and you can apply this to just about every character in this series, as there's always something more to them than the best face they can show. Always something more than just what you're initially presented with. For example, Alya seems to be cold and aloof, but is a very passionate and kind-hearted person. She's a hard worker, very earnest, and very straightforward. We see how she actually cares about other people, even her electoral opponents, and is willing to sacrifice for them because she believes it is the right thing to do. Similarly, she is very set on achieving all she can. When you get around to it, she's actually far from just the cold ice princess that everyone seems to make her out to be. Masachika seems lazy and unmotivated, but is highly capable and dependable. He proves this to Alya by getting the entire class to participate in the setup for the school festival, which has her swooning for the guy even though she won't admit it. Total tsundere. And we can say the same for any other character in this series that has appeared in a significant fashion so far. There's always another side to everything, and it's very mind-gaming at times. series. So obviously Yuki falls into this category too. Her refined queen bee attitude is a lie to disguise who she really is. But hold your horses, hold your horses. We've already seen the mask slip. She's a crazy incestuous otaku when nobody's watching. How astute of you to only see the obvious things the author bludgeons you in the face with. Because I think that both the personalities she puts on in public and in front of her brother are fake to some extent. But to really convey what I'm thinking and what I'm looking at, I have to try my luck at a bit of speculation based only on what I've seen so far. This is where the light novel thing comes in. If light novel readers who are far more familiar with this series would like to correct me on some points, then I'll gladly defer to your expertise because I don't have the time nor money to sink into reading up on this story. And I even went looking for some of the answers to this on the interwebs, and it came up short of what I was hoping to find. So here we go. There are several components to Yuki's character at play that give me the impression that she isn't actually some incestuous freak like Ruby Hoshino. First, and most important, is her love for her brother. Ironic, right? She's not a brother lover because she loves her brother. What kind of logic is that? But hear me out. In episode 5, she states in private that she's glad Masachika found someone to motivate him. Though, she does eventually comment that she wishes it would have been her. I want to establish this fact. Yuki's feelings towards her brother are not some twisted, incestuous fantasy she has. She shows genuine concern for him, even if not to his face. More so, there's some subtle hints played out throughout the story up until episode 11 that suggest the same thing. Through very brief flashbacks and one of Yuki's own delusions at one point, we get to see a glimpse of her early childhood and how she was raised, which, if I'm being honest, doesn't seem like a very happy home. The story makes Yuki out to be some sort of spare sibling in the family, the one who was sickly and couldn't be very active. She makes up a story about how Masachika accidentally took her first boob grab in elementary school during a game of tag, one that he quickly shuts down as one of her otaku fantasies by cross-examining the situation and calling her out on her lies. She apparently was asthmatic at the time and wasn't capable of running around. The first part of this, living in Kuze's shadow, is something we'll loop back around to shortly. The other part, the lie, segues quite well into our next point. Yuki is an absolute otaku. She loves manga, anime, and all of that stuff. In the light novel, it even says she was incapable of keeping any of her otaku belongings at her house because they'd likely be thrown out. So she turned to Masachika for storage. A good painting of the kind of strict and domineering family dynamic the two siblings were raised under. In all likelihood, Yuki's expression of quote-unquote eros towards her brother are part of having to wear a mask at home and pretend to be prim and proper. Having her brother as the only outlet for this side of her means he ends up being the target of her antics most of the time, much to his dismay. She often tries to recreate the things she loves, which happens to be manga rom-com tropes, with the person she cherishes most, likely as an outlet for all the things she's not allowed to express to anyone else. She really likes manga and anime and seems to want to have her own story, constantly living out these tropes herself or vicariously through other characters she happens to rope into her antics. Now, before we proceed any further, there is one more piece to this that I do want to underscore because it seems to get missed very often. There's a strong emphasis throughout this series on Masachika and Yuki still having a strong relationship with each other, especially when it comes to people related to the Suo household. We actually get it straight from the tap, with Masachika actually confirming to Yuki himself that he still loves her to death. Then it's the maid Ayano, who Masachika assures he still holds Yuki as the person he cares about more than anyone in the world. Later, it's the two's mother, who asks Yuki a similar question and receives a similar answer, which seems to please her. So what are we to infer from all of this information? Well, here's where my speculation starts. My guess is that Yuki was likely the overlooked child in favor of Masachika due to his unrivaled talent, especially because of her sickly state as a young child. Their grandfather seems to be very insistent on a certain way of life and a level of dignity and respect being attached to the name. He's not given much of a loving portrayal in any of the scenes or dialogue he's involved in. In fact, it looks like most people around him find him unbearable. It's likely this way of life was forced on Masachika first, and at some point, his mother's attitude towards his success changed, and I'm going to guess that this came about as a result of her concern for his development. He probably didn't have a normal childhood and was forced to perform on almost a daily basis, and she became deeply concerned for him because he didn't actually get to go out and play and enjoy life like a normal child would. It could even have been some sort of rising stress between his parents that ultimately manifested in this way as well. Whatever it was, I'm going to guess that this led Masachika to interpret this as her being dissatisfied with his performance, and that eventually made him lose his motivation. Well, that coupled with the disappearance of his first love, whom for now I will assume is actually Masha. He eventually grew to loathe the pressure and responsibility foisted upon him at a young age, especially when his mother wouldn't approve of his ability, and became sick of being the one who was always focused on. And that was the end of the motivated brother until Ali Sakujo came into the picture. So now we're looping back to Yuki. At the point where he finally grew sick of the pressure and spotlight, Masachika gave up and decided he wanted to be done with the Suo name, which got him cast out of the family and forced the so far neglected Yuki into the role as the only heir left. It isn't particularly clear whether Yuki resents Masachika for this or not. If I had to take a guess, I'd say she doesn't, but rather laments his loss of passion and motivation, effectively feeling sympathy for him rather than resentment. Like I pointed out earlier, she's clearly excited to see the signs of his return to form, though clearly saddened by the fact that it wasn't her who made him return somewhat to his former and more driven self. Their strong relationship is implied to have been a perpetual thing and not just a recent one, and so it's likely they've been close since they were able to walk. Possible that while everyone else overlooked Yuki in favor of her brother, he was the only one who she felt was genuinely on her side at any given moment, thus making their whole relationship a little bit more platonic than what people want to imply based on the flamboyant shows early in the series. And ultimately, here is my point in all of this. That the incest in the early parts of the series are not actually a deep desire Yuki has for physical intimacy with her brother, but rather a combination of her sadistic tendency to derive pleasure from tormenting people she takes interest in, a need to express all the things she cannot express with anyone but him, and a form of affection she shows for the manga that she really likes. Effectively, she gets to reenact the scenes from manga that she really likes, and also torment her brother at the same time. So it's a win-win for her. Keep in mind, she has no other outlet for the things she actually enjoys, as almost everything in her life needs to remain convinced that the prim and proper mask she wears is actually the real her. The only two people who seem to know the real version of her are Masachika and the maid Ayana. Alia has some experience with the more sadistic side of her personality, but even that is something she keeps buried behind the princess mask she wears at almost all times. Still, I think the series does a pretty good job of showing Yuki to be more so a troll than some incestuous freak. She does these things in order to torment her brother, and she does even more things to Alia in order to torment her because she sees that Masachika likes her, and as a result has taken interest in the girl who has now motivated her brother to actually perform again. Given everything I've laid out, I'm fairly convinced that Yuki's incest moments were really just to drive Masachika crazy because she likes manga and knows that this sort of thing bugs him. And that's pretty much the important bit that I think a lot of people tend to get wrong. Yuki Suo isn't the incestuous little sister, she's a sadistic otaku. And there's a huge world of difference between the two. I don't think I need to explain that anymore. The last little thing that intrigues me about her, though, is this odd competitiveness that seems to spring up after Masachika takes the side of her electoral opponent. I still won't lose, she says. She even makes it a point of interest to go up against the greatest genius the Suo family ever produced. To interpret her actions one way, it seems she has a need to prove herself superior to him. This would coincide with some of the points made earlier about her potentially living in his shadow. In this case, it could be that she's seeking to distinguish herself as someone other than just her brother's replacement. This would be the most likely outcome given the happenings of episode 12 and her determination to win. There is also the possibility that Yuki has some sort of ulterior motive to all of this. She's clearly put in the effort to try and force her brother into taking on more responsibility and putting in some hard work, as is shown in her attempt to trick Masachika into joining the student council, and her picking him as her vice president during middle school. It could potentially be her plan to force him into working hard to win the election in hopes of rekindling that old motivated part of him. But I find this outcome to be somewhat inconsistent with what I've already seen in the show. I know she cares about him and is clearly very cunning, but she's been shown to be terribly competitive as well, and shocked even that he chose someone other than her. In fact, you might very well be able to interpret some of her actions towards Alia as a little bit motivated by jealousy. So I doubt she actually wants to lose the election for his sake. Another theory that you could possibly interpret into this is that she wants to make sure Masachika never needs to return to the family so that he can live his life all on his own. But there's nothing really to support this conclusion directly as of yet, and it seems overly complicated for an explanation for her behavior. So I'm sticking with my original thesis. She wants to win in order to prove herself. Regardless of her motivation, I think that beneath the flash and flare of Yuki's flamboyant personality is someone who admires her brother's natural talent, is frustrated by the way of life forced on her, and driven by a desire to be seen as more than just his replacement. She's one of the more intriguing characters to me in this story, which is actually a bit of a problem because she's not even the main character. I think the show suffers for the fact that Yuki steals the show so much. But as an antagonist for Masachika, she works very well. And given some time, Alia could be developed very well because of her. Your two most important characters right now, though, are Masachika and Alia, and yet Yuki is the one who draws people in the most. It's hard to focus on the story when your main characters aren't even the most interesting point. On the flip side, she is a good obstacle, like I said, for the both of them to overcome, and could lead to them having really great character arcs later in the series. The point I wanted to make in all of this is I feel like a lot of subtle things get lost beneath the blatant flashing of incest tropes that happened very early on and caught a lot of attention. I feel like people might have misinterpreted that as something other than just a weird obsession of hers with acting out manga tropes. In that regard, her motivation seems to be entirely on experiencing the manga scenarios she reads rather than any form of consanguine activity. If there were another person she could get away with doing this to, she'd probably do that sort of thing to them as well, as shown when she stuck her face in Ayano's boobs. It just so happens that Masachika is the only person she can act out these delusions with, which is also combined with her sadistic tendency to torment people for fun. She knows Masachika hates it. She wants to experience the life of a manga character, and he's the only person that she can get away with doing these sorts of things to. Regardless of how it pans out, Alia-san surprised me with some of the most deceptively intricate characters of the season, Yuki being the one that often feels the most misinterpreted as just another incest freak. So, light novel readers, have at me. I await your input. In the meantime though, those of you listening, why don't you check out what I have to say about romance anime in general. It's a good video, I swear. Please, watch it.